Hi, this is week 11 and another very important topic for forestry, especially in the state of Colorado. So we talked about insects and diseases, entomology and pathology in week 10. And the chapter is titled Forest Protection, and yet it gives a meaning that it's a negative thing, when in fact insects and diseases, and now we're going to include fire, is a very natural part of the ecosystem and something that we have to understand and not be afraid of. This is a very famous photo that brought up a lot of questions. It hit social media years ago, and it makes you wonder whether fire is good or fire is bad. Is it killing wildlife? How do the deer know what they're doing? And it just really was an interesting photo that somebody captured. In order to study fire, we have to start with the history of fire, which one of the historical fires was in Peshtigo, Wisconsin. I've actually been there. And it was October 8th through the 15th. And if you can think about this, back in this time period, we didn't have the firefighting capability that we have now, but 1,200 lives were lost, hundreds of homes burned to the ground, communities devastated, immense stands of virgin timber destroyed, and wildlife killed. So this was a poster that was put up in remembrance of the Peshtigo fire. At the same weekend, the Chicago fire happened, and that was a very famous fire, and a song was written over about that fire. And you may have heard about the cow kicking over the can and starting the fire. So Chicago got more famous, but in fact, Peshtigo started making people fear fire. So here it says here the cause dry weather conditions, which is a cyclical thing, and human carelessness. Now this is pre-Smokey Bear, but let's keep going here. In order to understand fire, we have to understand the triangle and the fire behavior. Triangle, two different ones. Fire regime, animal adaptations, plant adaptations. And I'm going to teach you just a tiny little bit about prescribed burn, defensible space, and fire suppression. Now we have two classes, F 130 and 190, for you to get your red card if you're interested in getting on a fire crew. And we also have a course in fire ecology spring semester that I recommend you taking if you want to understand the management of forests today. So the benefits of the forest fire are first and foremost that they're an integral part of the life cycle of the forest and that they're not just a negative factor. They clear dead and dying trees, they aid in recycling nutrients, the ash nourishes the soil, it provides an ideal environment for germination, and supports the process of natural selection, improving growth. Also, it prepares seed beds for conifers that produce serotinous cones. And by now you should be comfortable with the word serotinous. And so now we're tying in that relationship between those closed cones on a lodgepole pine and how it's a fire-dependent species. It also is a natural order of forest succession. So it's the cleaning out, like it says in the first bullet, and it's just a part of the natural cycle, whether it happens naturally or whether we decide to manage the forest and clear cut or do some kind of forest management practices. So these are all benefits of the forest fire. The drawbacks of the forest fire, and really the reason for the fire suppression that we have today, is that it threatens communities and individuals. People lose their homes. There's a lot of shelters, and due to the wildland-urban interface, there's many overlap between people living in the forest and how forests are management. Because we took fire out of the ecosystem by suppressing fires, instead of being naturally occurring fires or small incident fires, they're catastrophic now, and that's why we go in and fight them. We also study the influence it has on air quality. So these are some of the drawbacks of the forest fire, and partially the reason, simplified, that we fight fires today. So the first thing is the fire triangle. In order for the fire to burn, you have to have oxygen, heat, and fuel. Well, when these conditions are right, then a fire will occur. Now, if I took a matchstick, which I'm not going to burn a stick right here on the screencast, but if I took a matchstick and held it up, it would actually go out, not because of the oxygen and not because it doesn't have fuel, but because it's not preheating, because the flame is going up and the wood matchstick is below the fire. So that's just one simple illustration of the fire triangle. But what you need to remember is it's fire, fuel, oxygen, and heat. Now, so enter Smokey the Bear, Smokey Bear. So he made the public believe that fire is bad and we should put out all fires. So since the 1820s and the 10 a.m. policy, which meant that you had to put every fire out by 10 a.m. in the morning. And that's what started the fire suppression era that we've been in for the last 90 years. So it was Smokey the Bear and also Bambi movies like Disney that created a negative public opinion about fires. The impacts of the fire in more detail, and way too many than you need to remember, are that they're part of the forest ecosystem. They change the landscape. They affect photosynthesis, food web, seed capacity, ozone layer depletion, global warming. There's so many impacts of a fire, but we need to think of them still as a natural ecological process when they're not catastrophic. Here's also a nice graph for you that shows the ecological consequences of fires and the smoke particles and the gas mixtures and harmful insects and parasitic fungi and forest fires aggravating soil conditions. So this is the long version, and also why we would teach an entire semester of fire ecology. The causes of forest fire can be divided into two categories: environmental, which are beyond control, and human, which are controllable. The environmental are forest fires starting from natural causes such as lightning, which set the trees on fire. However, the rain can extinguish the fires without causing much damage. High atmospheric temperatures and dryness, low humidity are what continue to offer the favorable circumstance for the fire to keep going. Now, the next one is the matchstick forest, and that's a demonstration that we'd like to do in class, where you put matchsticks and clay in a cake pan and look at fire behavior. Fire behavior also has a triangle. It's different than the fire triangle. This is fire behavior. It's common in that it has fuel, but the other two sides of the triangle are weather and topography. And that's what influences how much a fire burns, and also if we're choosing to suppress the fire, how we fight it. Now we're going to take a break and I'm going to give you a quick question to quiz you on.